The throne room of Persepolis was not a place for noise. Even in triumph, Persian royalty practiced restraint, each motion, each word tightly choreographed to preserve the empire's divine order. When King Xerxes entered adorned in embroidered gold and towering headdress, not a sound followed him. But beneath that silence was an unrelenting truth. When a man was found guilty of treason, he didn't merely violate the laws of Persia, he ruptured the spiritual harmony of the cosmos itself. The accused stood motionless. A former envoy once trusted to deliver Xerxes' commands to the western satrapies, now reduced to a trembling figure draped in torn robes. He had not shouted his innocence nor begged for mercy. He understood, as all Persians did, that betrayal was not debated. It was absorbed, then answered. Xerxes did not look at the man. Instead, he addressed the Ahura Mazda priests assembled in a row behind him. He carried the breath of the empire in his lungs, the king said, and with it, he spoke rot. The sentence was passed not with volume but with precision. No axe, no public whipping, not even a formal executioner. Instead, 2 guards in crimson sashes stepped forward and placed their hands on the traitor's shoulders. The man collapsed not from force but from knowing what came next. They would not kill him, not quickly. They would begin with emptiness. That night, the man was transported under cover of darkness to the gardens of Ecbatana, a walled compound miles from the public eye. Here among the groves and streams usually reserved for nobility stood a small, windowless stone chamber. It had no locks, only a door so thick it could silence thunder. The man was placed inside. No food, no candles, no words. 3 days passed. When the guards opened the door, they found him alive but changed. He had scratched patterns into his own arms, his eyes unable to adjust to light. His voice was gone either from screaming or silence, but they were not finished. The second stage began exposure. The man was dragged barefoot through the capital's marketplace. Merchants were told to keep selling. Children were ordered to laugh. But beneath that forced normalcy, a strange unease festered. This was not how Persians punished thieves or murderers. This was reserved for a different category, those who cracked the pillars of the empire from within. No branding iron was used. No formal speech announced the crime. Instead, the accused was led to a raised platform carved from imported stone. Some said it was once part of a sacred Zoroastrian altar. There he was chained not by the wrists or neck, but by the tongue. A bronze clasp pierced through the muscle and held him upright, gagging every time he moved. It was an act designed not just for pain but for symbolism. The mouth that once lied in the name of Persia would now remain permanently open, stripped of agency. Bystanders watched for hours. No one approached. No one offered water. But something was different this time. As the sun set, the priests returned not to bless, but to purify. One stepped forward and painted white ash across the man's forehead, whispering, "Let no shadow carry his memory." Then they burned his clothes. Still alive, still chained, the man was doused with vinegar and wrapped in a net of reeds. A ceremonial hawk, a symbol of royal clarity, was released into the sky. Only then was the man lifted into a cart and taken toward the Zagros Mountains. There, a new ritual awaited transformation. In Persian justice, a traitor's body could not be left whole. To do so risked its reuse by Ahriman, the god of chaos. So the final stage of punishment was anatomical, not just symbolic. The man was entombed inside himself. The process involved trained executioners and a priest-physician. Over several hours, the traitor's joints were bound in a fetal position, and hot resin was poured over his skin, sealing every orifice. His body, still barely alive, was inserted into a hollowed cedar trunk. The tree was then sealed and placed in an upright position beneath a sacred cliff, where vultures gathered not to feed but to watch. This was not death by violence. This was death by disintegration, slow, spiritual, and designed for no audience at all. And in that silence, a new horror emerged. Because once sealed, the traitor's screams could not escape. No burial, no cremation, no closure. Just the faint echo of suffering inside a royal grove, only audible to those who dared listen closely. Years later, young scribes passing the cliffs were warned never to linger near the trunk at night. Some claimed it pulsed. Others said it whispered. But none could deny something had been left behind. Not a man. Not even a warning. But a presence, the residue of a justice too sacred to name and too cruel to repeat. The empire had no interest in remembering his name. That too was part of the sentence. But his punishment would shape what came next. Because the Persians hadn't invented cruelty. They had simply ritualized it. The boat, the milk, and the flies. It began with a lie. Mithridates, a respected officer in Xerxes' western campaign, had returned from Lydia claiming victory over a rebellious city. He carried letters of surrender gifts of silver, even the severed heads of supposed enemy commanders. But something didn't sit right with the royal scribes. The seals on the letters bore signs of forgery. The heads belonged not to enemies but to Lydian nobles known to have supported Persia. When the truth surfaced that Mithridates had slaughtered allies to inflate his glory and cover up a failed operation, Xerxes did not erupt in anger. He simply nodded once and said, "He has chosen his death." But what followed was not immediate, nor was it military, it was theological. Mithridates was not sentenced by a general. He was handed to the priests of punishment, a class of ritual enforcers who answered not to the king, but to the cosmic hierarchy they believed governed life and death. They chose Scaphism. In Greek, the word translates loosely to boating. But what the Persians called takt izor was not a method of execution. It was a journey one designed to dissolve the soul, not just the flesh. The process began at dawn with Mithridates stripped naked and placed between two hollowed wooden shells shaped like small canoes. One covered his back, the other his front, leaving his arms, legs, and head exposed. His limbs were tied outward unnaturally so that no motion could be made without pain. Then came the feeding. A mixture of milk and honey was force-fed down his throat, far beyond what a stomach could hold. The same mixture was smeared across his skin layer after layer, until he shone like a grotesque statue of sweetness. He gagged, he wept, he begged. But no one answered. The boat was then floated onto a stagnant marsh pond near Ecbatana, chosen specifically for its swarm-heavy insect life. Anchored in place, the structure became a prison, a stage, and eventually a tomb. On the first day, nothing happened. He vomited, defecated, and pleaded. By the second the insects had found him, they came for the milk. Then for the wounds. Then for the soft parts. Flies nested in his eyelids. Beetles burrowed into the folds between his fingers. Worms emerged not from the ground but from within, born of infected flesh and the breakdown of his intestinal lining. Every morning the priests returned. They fed him again. More milk, more honey. The process wasn't just allowed to continue, it was maintained. They ensured he lived as long as possible to feel every stage of his unbecoming. By day 4, his eyes had swollen shut. He could no longer scream. Only shallow grunts and wet coughs escaped. The priest documented everything not for curiosity, but for precedent. Persian justice was not improvisational. It was archived. What made Scaphism so terrifying was not just the pain. It was the fact that the victim never knew when it would end. There was no executioner, no sword. Just biology heat and the slow betrayal of the body's defenses. Each bite, each egg hatched beneath the skin was a reaffirmation betrayal would not be killed. It would be digested. By the 10th day, the marsh stank so intensely that the guards posted nearby had to wear scented cloths around their faces. By the 12th, Mithridates was still alive but unrecognizable. Maggots had consumed most of his lower body. His skin had ruptured in several places, revealing bone and swollen tissue that pulsed independently of breath. Crows had begun circling, not for the corpse, but for the living flesh that no longer resisted. There were rumors that Xerxes himself visited once in disguise. No one confirmed it. But the guards noticed that on day 15, the usual prayers offered during feeding were replaced by chants of erasure rituals meant not to bless the dying, but to sever their soul from history. On day 17, the breathing stopped. But the punishment hadn't ended. The boat was left floating for another week. No burial, no removal, just silence and the gentle lap of water against cedar. And yet, despite everything, Scaphism was not designed to extract confessions nor to entertain. It was not spectacle, it was doctrine. Because in Persian belief, a traitor who lied with his body had to die by that same body. He could not be killed with honor, for that would imply participation in the sacred cycle of life and death. He had to be digested by the world he betrayed. Later, when Alexander's forces swept through the empire, they found records of Scaphism in the archives of Susa and Persepolis. The Macedonians recoiled in horror, but they also copied it. Variants of the method would appear centuries later in obscure Roman provinces, adapted and rebranded. But none matched the original's precision. Because Scaphism was not about punishment. It was about belonging, about reminding the world that those who cast themselves out of the Persian moral universe would not be punished within it. They would be excluded from it altogether. Even the worms would forget his name. The gilded cage of Susa. When the conspirator Artembares was captured, there was no blood spilled. He did not resist. He did not plead. He simply bowed before the king and spoke a single sentence: "I did not believe the empire would last." That sentence alone sealed his fate, not for the plot, but for the heresy embedded within it. Artembares was no common traitor. He was one of the king's inner circle, raised in the palace, educated by royal tutors, and once entrusted with the empire's provincial tax routes. His betrayal, uncovered through intercepted scrolls written in invisible ink of lemon and ash, had been meant to shatter Persia from within. But more than the conspiracy itself, it was his indifference that made him dangerous. In the eyes of the court, he was not a revolutionary. He was apathetic. And the Persians feared indifference more than dissent. For such a man, death was not enough. The body, after all, could be hidden. But the memory, the idea that someone of such rank could betray the empire without remorse, had to be publicly destroyed. So the priest chose a punishment that would reverse the dignity of his life: permanent exposure. At the heart of Susa, the capital's civic and religious hub, stood a tall stone pedestal once used for Zoroastrian fire rituals. It had been dormant for years. On that pedestal, a custom-built bronze cage was mounted, large enough to contain a man, small enough to prevent rest. Artembares was placed inside upright, his arms chained above his head and his legs too bent to sit. A golden mask molded in his likeness was affixed to the bars, giving the illusion at a distance that he was calmly observing the city. Inside, his body endured the sun wind and humiliation. The public was instructed to carry on as normal. Merchants opened stalls beneath him. Scholars gathered at the nearby library. Priests lit incense that drifted up into his cage but never purified it. He was not to be fed, but not to be starved either. Every third day, attendants poured goat broth and barley mash through the funnel into his mouth. Just enough to prevent death, never enough to strengthen. His urine dripped into a bronze pan below, emptied ritually by acolytes who refused to make eye contact. And yet the cage did something no execution ever could. It made consequence visible. Children grew up pointing at the cage, their parents warning, "That's what happens to those who forget. They belong to the flame." Travelers from distant satrapies sketched it into letters describing the shimmering figure above the marketplace, some claiming it was not a man at all, but a watchful god, punishing from within. But the truth was more cruel. Inside the cage, Artembares was unmaking. His skin peeled from constant sun exposure. His joints stiffened into deformity. Insects nested beneath the metal mask, occasionally crawling across his face. At night, when the streets emptied, he would whisper, not in confession but in memory, reciting palace songs, repeating tax codes, recalling the names of horses he had once ridden. The priest believed this was a form of repentance. But they were wrong. He wasn't repenting. He was reminding himself that he had mattered. The cage was polished weekly, its bronze exterior gleaming, even as the man within decayed. Citizens debated how long he would last. Some claimed he died in the 3rd year and was replaced by a mute servant to maintain the illusion. Others said he spoke in tongues by the 6th, offering prophetic riddles that only madmen could decipher. Regardless of the truth, no one approached too closely. Not because they were afraid, but because they knew the cage wasn't meant to teach. It was meant to infect, to plant the image of a broken noble in every mind, so that treachery would always come with a face, one distorted by time hunger and unrelenting daylight. In his final weeks, his teeth fell out. The golden mask began to tilt, revealing slivers of the man beneath. One eye gone, lips cracked, still breathing. And then one morning he was simply gone. No announcement, no funeral, no replacement. The cage remained empty. The priest left it there untouched and ordered that it never be used again. It became a monument not to treason but to visibility, a reminder that in the Persian world, forgetting the empire was a worse crime than opposing it. Years later, Greek scholars visiting Susa would record the story of the golden ghost, a man punished by light instead of fire, whose cage was said to still shimmer at dawn. But Persian texts were clearer and crueler. Artambares, they wrote, had not been executed. He had been displayed. Because in a world where empire meant eternity, the worst fate was not annihilation. It was immortality without meaning. Feasting with the dead. The betrayal of Commander Otanes was discovered in the most humiliating way possible through a child's game. A group of servant boys imitating the court's military rituals in the palace gardens had stumbled across a cache of scrolls buried beneath a fig tree. The writings contained coded messages between Otanes and rebel factions in Bactria, plans to divert supply chains, weaken border patrols, and quietly bleed the Empire's reach in the east. When confronted, Otanes didn't deny the charges. He merely said, "It is better to dine with the future than starve in loyalty." The brazenness of the phrase shocked even the most hardened royal guards. But it was the word dine that would shape his punishment. The court could have ordered a military execution. Instead, the Magi proposed something ancient, something pre-Zoroastrian borrowed from the older rites buried deep in Persia's tribal past. They called it the Banquet of the Forgotten. The ritual was rarely invoked and had not been seen in public memory for generations. But in moments of extreme betrayal, especially when it involved comrades, it was said that a man must be sealed not just away from the empire, but within the very thing he destroyed. The priest selected a remote underground chamber, once used as a plague crypt, long abandoned, overgrown with moss and silence. Its walls bore ancient carvings of the underworld where liars were said to gnaw their own tongues for eternity. Otanes was stripped of insignia and dressed in the same uniform he had worn during the border campaigns, the only mercy granted to him. He was then shackled and led by torchlight through a maze of stone corridors until the chamber appeared square, damp, and already populated by corpses, 6 men, all former soldiers, all executed for treason in past decades. Their bodies had not been buried, cremated, or honored. They had been preserved in various states of rot and desiccation, dressed in faded uniforms and positioned around a central stone table. Some sat, others lay slumped. One was fixed upright in a chair with wire through the jaw. At the center of the table, a loaf of petrified bread and an empty bronze plate. Otanes was not told what would happen next. He was simply shoved into the chamber and locked inside. No food, no water, just company. For the first day, he pounded on the door. For the second, he sang war songs. By the fourth, the screams began. But this punishment was not about agony. It was about mirroring. Otanes, who had consigned his men to die at the border while negotiating secretly with their enemies, would now rot among them, unfed and unburied, as they had been. After a week, the royal record keeper arrived to document his state. The door was opened briefly and the report was clinical. Skin broken from clawing at walls. One finger missing, possibly self-inflicted. Attempts made to reposition corpses into conversation postures. Evidence of attempted consumption of non-edible materials. Shoe leather hair Otanes was still alive. He lasted 19 days. When the door was finally opened again, he was slumped at the stone table, one arm draped over the shoulder of the wire-jawed corpse beside him. In his other hand, he clutched the petrified loaf cracked in two. A priest stepped in, recited the rites of excision, and the chamber was sealed forever. No one was allowed to speak his name again. His records were removed from the military rolls. His birthplace was renamed. His descendants were forbidden from entering military service for 3 generations. But the chamber itself remained. No marker, no guard. Just the understanding that somewhere beneath the soil of central Persia, a man had been left to die not alone, but in the company of his consequences. The Banquet of the Forgotten was never repeated, but its idea persisted. Among soldiers, it became a whispered warning. You can only betray the living once, but the dead will never let you go. Years later, when Alexander's men desecrated Persian crypts, they found the chamber intact, but never opened it. The stench seeped through the cracks, and one Macedonian scribe recorded that the air itself recoiled. What haunted them was not the death. It was the deliberateness. That someone had designed this. That an entire civilization had once believed it necessary. And that in the Empire's eyes, Otanes had not just died. He had served one final duty as proof that even traitors must feast. The blood oath reversed. In the inner sanctum of Persepolis, amid the chants and saffron smoke of the Temple of Fire, oaths were not mere words, they were cosmic contracts. Every syllable spoken in ritual aligned the soul with the divine order. To break an oath wasn't simply to deceive, it was to unravel reality. And that is what made the betrayal of High Priest Arbuzi so cataclysmic. For 2 decades, Arbuzi had presided over royal ceremonies, whispered blessings into the ears of kings, and interpreted omens before battles. He was seen not just as a conduit to Ahura Mazda, but as a steward of harmony. But when it was discovered that Arbuzi had falsified celestial readings to delay the coronation of Xerxes' chosen heir, thereby aiding a rival prince, he was branded something far worse than a traitor. He was a cosmic saboteur. And so the Magi prepared a punishment drawn from the oldest texts scribed in animal blood on bark and hidden from public record. It was known only by a name few dared speak: the reversal. The ritual began in silence. Arbuzi was not shackled or stripped. He was dressed in full ceremonial robes, his hands perfumed, his beard combed and braided, as if preparing for a blessing. He was led by candlelight into the Chamber of Echoes, an underground stone hall with no corners designed so that sound never fully disappeared. There 24 of his former acolytes awaited in a circle, faces covered in ash mouths sewn shut. In their hands, each held a scroll fragments of oaths Arbuzi had once sworn. A crimson thread was wound around his tongue, pulled gently by 2 priests as he knelt. Then the ritual began. Arbuzi was commanded to recite every vow he had ever taken, but in reverse. Not just word by word, syllable by syllable. And for each error, a thin reed was drawn across his tongue, slicing it lightly. The ceremony lasted for hours. He began with confidence, his memory vast, his breath steady. But the deeper into the ritual he descended, the more his voice faltered. The sentences unraveled into groans, blood pooled at his knees. And then came the final vow, the coronation covenant, which he had violated. As he tried to utter its reversal, he began to seize. The priest did not interfere. This too was part of the ritual. It was believed that as the oaths reversed, so too would his spirit fold in on itself, returning to the moment of his betrayal, but without the ability to change it. Then the final act, the gag of ink. A thick paste made from charred scrolls, donkey bile, and crushed wormwood was smeared over his mouth and forced down his throat. It was believed this would bind the false words inside him, preventing them from reaching the afterlife. Only then did the punishment turn physical. His lips were stitched shut not to prevent speech, but to preserve the seal. His eyes were painted with lamp black to extinguish the inner fire, and he was led in total silence through the temple's back corridors to a location known only to a few, the Sanctuary of Breach. It was a hollow in the earth where traitor priests were entombed upright, buried vertically, their mouths at ground level. Not to breathe, but to listen. Arbuzi was lowered into the earth, his body coated in honey and camphor, to preserve it just enough. A clay pipe was inserted from the surface down to his sealed lips so that air insects and whispers might find their way in. He would not starve. Rainwater would collect in shallow veins around his body. But he would never move again. Above his grave, no marker, no stone, only a torch which would remain lit until the next betrayal by a priest. But none came for nearly a century. And yet temple apprentices would sometimes report hearing sounds from beneath the torch at night. Not cries, but chanting as if someone were still trying to recite something they could no longer remember correctly. In time, a new rite developed whenever an oath was taken. The final word would be spoken directly into the earth toward the mouth of the buried traitor, so he would hear what fidelity sounded like. In this way, Arbuzi was forced to witness the loyalty he had once corrupted forever. His body never recovered, but his mind, some believed, had been caught between syllables, eternally trapped in the moment of reversal, where meaning decays but memory does not. In the end, he was not executed. He was rewound. A man devoured not by beasts or fire, but by the very words he once weaponized. Salt honey and the mountain tomb. The rebellion of General Astyages shocked no one, least of all the king. For years, whispers had followed the aging commander that he resented serving under a younger monarch, that he had amassed a private militia in the Zagros foothills, that he had stopped sending tribute. When his banners finally rose in open revolt, it confirmed what the court had long suspected: loyalty, even in Persia, had an expiration date. But it was the symbolism of Astyages' treason that stung the most. He had once been the king's sword arm, credited with crushing the Scythians, securing the Median frontiers, and building temples in honor of Ahura Mazda himself. His betrayal wasn't just military, it was ancestral. And so when he was captured alive, filthy, starved, dragged from a cave, no joy echoed through the palace. Only a heavy ceremonial silence. What does an empire do when one of its architects becomes its destroyer? It doesn't erase him. It preserves him. The priest decreed that Astyages would undergo the most sacred and feared of all traitor punishments, the mountain tombing. This rite was reserved only for those who had once stood closest to power, then turned against it. Unlike Scaphism or the cage, it wasn't about suffering in public. It was about outlasting the present, becoming a caution, not just for the living, but for the unborn. The process began with purification, not of the soul, but of the body. His skin was shaved and scrubbed with crushed citrus and obsidian powder. His mouth was rinsed with vinegar and rosewater until it bled. No cloth touched his body that hadn't been soaked in salt brine. Then came the honey. Over 3 consecutive days, temple servants brushed his body with alternating layers of salt paste and wild honey. Salt to leach moisture, honey to seal it. Insects swarmed immediately but were quickly driven off. He was not to be devoured, not yet. His body was being readied for eternity. Next, the wrapping strips of linen infused with myrrh and ground resin. Each pass of the cloth included a prayer binding his limbs with the sacred names of the empire he betrayed. By the end, he looked like a mummified prince, not a disgraced general. But unlike Egyptian mummification, there would be no death before burial. Astyages was still very much alive. 2 guards carried him silent, bound, and blinking on a ceremonial litter up a steep, barren path into the mountains east of Persepolis. At a plateau known as the Eye of the Empire, a tomb had been carved directly into the cliffside, narrow vertical lined with black limestone. There was no door, only a slit wide enough to insert a man standing upright. Astyages was placed in a stone frame locked at the ankles and wrists to ensure he would never slump. Then a priest inserted a thin reed into his mouth, his only conduit to air and rain. No food, no water. The slit was sealed with molten resin and a stone tablet bearing a simple inscription. He built. He broke. He rests. And that was it. No witnesses, no executioners, no returning procession. Just a preserved man in a vertical grave watching nothing, feeling everything becoming the very warning he had once ignored. But the punishment was not meant to stop with his death. For generations, the tomb of Astyages was shown to young officers climbing the ranks of the Persian military. They were not told the full story. Only fragments. A name, a mountain, a betrayal. It was said that if you pressed your ear to the tomb during the dry season, you could hear a heartbeat. Not of the man, but of the lesson. That loyalty, once broken, could echo longer than any victory. 1 century later, when Alexander the Great marched through Persia and reached the mountain tomb, he did not desecrate it. Instead, he ordered that no man set foot within 5 boat lengths of the cliff. His aide reportedly asked why. Alexander replied, "Because he is still watching." Over time, moss grew over the inscription. Earthquakes shook the rock face. But the tomb never crumbled. Its engineering was flawless, its preservation complete. And the honey still faintly present, soaking the cloth of a man who refused to rot. For in Persia, the final shame was not to be forgotten. It was to be remembered too long. The oracle who lied. The most feared words in the Persian court were not rebellion or assassination. They were, "The stars have shifted." Astrologers and oracles were not fringe figures in the Achaemenid world. They were architects of reality. Every major decision, from military campaigns to royal births, required celestial approval. When an oracle spoke, time itself was shaped to fit their utterance. So when Lady Thamyris, High Oracle of Pasargadae, declared that the king's rival brother had been born under the dragon's tail, and thus fated to rule it, caused immediate political chaos. Troops repositioned, nobles hesitated, and for 3 days the empire teetered on the edge of civil collapse. Then one court mathematician discovered an anomaly. The stars had not shifted. The charts had been altered manually by Thamyris herself. A single scratched line on a clay tablet concealed beneath wax. The revelation landed like a thunderclap. The king's scribes wrote it plainly. She did not see. She chose. The punishment had to be absolute, but different. Thamyris was not a soldier or courtier. She could not be flogged like a criminal or entombed like a general. She had wielded truth as power, and so her sentence had to be its inversion. They called it the blind exile. The ritual began at the Temple of Light, the highest structure in Pasargadae. Thamyris was brought in blindfolded not as a courtesy, but as preparation. Before a gathered assembly of scribes, nobles, and astronomers, her ceremonial garb was stripped and replaced with plain gray robes. Her voice, trained to echo through temples, was never heard again. The high priest did not deliver a condemnation. He simply held up the wax tablet she had altered, now hardened and cracked, and shattered it on the temple floor. Acolytes gathered the shards into a bowl of goat's blood and placed it at her feet. Then came the blinding not by fire or blade, but by alchemy. A mixture of powdered lead almond oil and crushed peacock feather was prepared and slowly dripped into her eyes. It didn't burn, it dulled. Sight faded like the closing of curtains, not painful, but irreversible. The second stage was silencing. Rather than severing her tongue, the priest employed a slower method, embedding bitter calamus root beneath the tongue daily until the taste of words became so unbearable that the body refused to speak. The result was not muteness, but aversion. Her mouth remained intact, but language itself became agony. When the rituals concluded, she was placed aboard a covered wagon, escorted only by silent attendants. No destination was announced, but those who watched from the city walls knew where she was going. The Oracle Shrine of the Hollow Wind, a ruin nestled high in the Alborz Mountains, once sacred, now abandoned, said to be a place where false prophets heard only their own echoes. Its walls were carved with failed predictions from centuries past, wars that never came, rains that never fell, kings that never rose. There she would be left, not to die, but to exist in absence. Inside the shrine, the only furniture was a flat stone with 7 etched circles once used for stargazing. Now it served as her bed. She was given no tools, no paper, no ink, no fire, just wind and regret. And yet, pilgrims still came. Not to hear her speak, but to watch, to see a figure once so powerful now reduced to silence and darkness. Some said she would weep when she heard the rustling of charts. Others believed she had memorized the stars so completely that even blind she could trace their positions with her fingers on the cold floor. The priests offered no clarification, but they sent one message to the outer provinces etched in silver. The stars were not wrong, only the one who read them. Thamyris remained in the Hollow Wind Shrine until the end of her days. Some claimed she lived over 30 years in exile, aging into shadow. Others whispered she walked off the cliff on the winter solstice, her last act finally aligned with the stars. The shrine was never sealed, never desecrated. It remained a place of pilgrimage, not to find truth, but to respect its fragility. Because in Persia, when a seer betrayed the divine order, the worst punishment was not pain or death. It was irrelevance, to see nothing, to say nothing, to know everything and never again be believed. The cow of bronze and the whisper of smoke. By the time Megabezoos was arrested, the halls of Persepolis were already bracing for the inevitable. He had been too ambitious for too long, too generous with coin, too quick to charm disaffected nobles, too practiced at turning praise into manipulation. But no one had expected him to go so far as to forge the king's seal. That act was not just treason, it was theft of divinity. To impersonate the will of the king believed to channel Ahura Mazda himself was to declare oneself above the cosmic order. And yet when confronted with the evidence, Megabezoos merely smiled. I wrote as the king, he said, because the king refused to speak. There would be no silent punishment this time, no hidden ritual or whispered exile. His betrayal had been theatrical, his execution would match. But Persia had no method brutal enough for what they intended. So they borrowed one. The brazen bull, a contraption whispered about in Greek merchant circles, was said to roast men alive within a metal sculpture of a bull, their screams transformed into music by clever engineering. It was the invention of a Sicilian tyrant later condemned even by his own court. But for Megabezoos, who had styled himself as a philosopher of empire, it was horrifyingly appropriate. And so artisans were summoned to craft a Persian version, a fire-gilded bronze bull with inlaid inscriptions, including a single damning line etched across its flank. The one who spoke as the flame shall now feed it. The construction took 2 months. During that time, Megabezoos was held in a tower cell with an open view of the artisans below, forced to watch the instrument of his end take shape hour by hour. When the day came, the crowd gathered in eerie quiet. There was no festival, no chanting, just the bull gleaming in the sunlight positioned atop a stone platform in the Garden of Command. Megabazos was led forward naked, his hands unbound. He refused to beg. Instead, he bowed not to the king, but to the crowd. And in one final act of defiance, he spoke aloud, "Let the Empire see what it does to its visionaries." Then they pushed him in. The bronze hatch slammed shut, and resin was poured along the seams to seal the interior. Beneath the sculpture, a roaring fire was lit using dried cypress branches soaked in scented oil. And then the waiting began. At first, the bull was silent. But as the flames climbed and the metal heated, faint noises began to escape, a groan, a stifled cry. The bull's nostrils had been carved to amplify sound, and within moments, it began to sing. Not a melody. A scream turned melodic, by design reverberating through narrow tubes echoing across the garden like a dirge composed by the gods. People wept, not out of pity but horror, because the sound didn't stop. For nearly an hour the bull cried, and then abruptly it didn't. The priest waited a full day before opening the hatch. Inside, all that remained was a scorched, blackened skeleton, curled in the fetal position, its jaw fused shut by heat. The smell lingered for days, but the execution had only just begun. The bull was not dismantled. It was left where it stood, placed beneath a shrine canopy and renamed the Whisper of Judgment. Citizens were encouraged to visit it once in their lives, to look into its hollow eyes and reflect on the line between ambition and arrogance. Children were told that if they listened closely, they might still hear the faint music inside, not from the fire, but from the soul trapped in bronze. Years later, the Greeks would write of this moment with unease. They had invented the bull as an instrument of tyranny, but the Persians had transformed it into philosophy. An empire capable of turning a foreign tool of terror into a sacred warning. Megabazos' name was removed from all administrative documents. His properties dissolved, his extended family exiled to the Caspian frontier. But the bull remained, unmoved, unforgotten, because unlike other punishments, this one was designed not to erase a man, but to let him echo forever, to be remembered in pieces. The Persian Empire did not invent cruelty, but it gave cruelty a function and a language. To betray Persia was not simply to oppose a king. It was to unravel a sacred pattern, a cosmology of order, light, and truth. And for such violations, punishment had to match the scale of the disruption. Each traitor's end was a mirror reflecting not only what they had done, but what the empire believed they had damaged. In that reflection, punishment became more than deterrent. It became a ritual correction, a cosmic recalibration. The traitor's body became an altar, their suffering a sacrifice offered not to sate vengeance, but to restore balance. But what do these punishments say about the empire itself? Was Persia just or simply afraid of entropy? These rituals, burial alive in honey and salt, the tongue pierced for lies. The corpse locked upright in the hollow of a mountain did not merely destroy individuals. They crafted symbols. They allowed fear to be passed down not through law, but through memory. Every punishment in its brutality became a kind of teaching aid, a message encoded not in words but in enduring horror. And yet the most haunting question remains, did they work? Empires fall. Persia, too, would crumble under its own weight, its cosmic order fractured by forces it could not bind or purify. The names of the punished faded, but the rituals did not vanish. They resurfaced in whispers, resurfaced in other regimes, reshaped and repurposed from the oubliettes of medieval Europe to the death camps of the modern age. Cruelty may not require innovation, but it remembers its teachers. Today the mountain tombs are silent, the bronze bull long melted, the scrolls etched in blood dissolved into sand. But the concept survives. That treason is not just an act, but a heresy. That punishment should not merely end life, but echo through time. That there are fates worse than death, and that perhaps the most terrifying punishment of all is to be remembered only through the method of your destruction.